would be honored if you would join us.
Greetings, and welcome to another Film Stories. Let's hit the clip.
Raoul! I'll be in my trailer! Taking a nap! Excuse me,
Please, Raoul! I can give you stars! Just drop the refrigerator in my head one more time!
Drink up on your head 23 times already!
I can take it, don't worry about me!
I'm not worried about you, I'm worried about the refrigerator!
It's January 1986. After a fair amount of will he, won't he, after being approached several times before getting blocked by key boardroom members, Michael Eisner, the former Paramount boss, finally got his feet firmly under the table at Disney as the company head. And he was supported by Jeffrey Katzenberg, who also came across from Paramount, along with Frank Wells. And the first film that Eisner at Disney got under his belt and could kind of claim full stewardship over was released, and that film was Down and Out in Beverly Hills, which starred Richard Dreyfuss, Bette Midler, and Nick Nolte. That film released under the Touchstone Pictures label. It contained profanity and even brief sex scenes. Audiences loved it, critics, especially Roger Ebert, loved it. The film cleaned up at the box office, earning $62 million back from a $14 million budget. It actually replaced Splash as Disney's most profitable live-action film ever, despite the fact that it came with an R rating. And so Eisner quickly began to look around for other high-concept ideas. His movie model was exactly that, really built upon frugal production styles of high-concept ideas. A-list megastars didn't really come to work for Disney back in those days. Believe it or not, it was all about the script for Eisner. This, of course, movie production wasn't, of course, Eisner's only job as the head of the Walt Disney Corporation. Around this time, he was also putting in plans into place to design and select the location for Euro Disney, which, of course, would eventually come to Paris. But coming from a TV and movie background, ABC, the network, Paramount, he was keen to get these divisions particularly into big profits because they weren't at that point with Disney, whereas the theme parks they were already turning over major money, and Eisner was brought in with the mandate to get those TV and film divisions moving. Incidentally, actually, mentioning Euro Disney, it was in 1985, the year before Down and Out came out, that Eisner was in Paris scouting for a Euro Disney location, and he saw the hit French movie, hold on, I'll try and get my French accent into play here, Trois Hommes Un Couffin. I'm so sorry. Being a fan of the high concept conceit of Trois Hommes, having to look after a baby, I'm sure you've guessed the film by now, in spite of my terrible French accent, which is terrible. In spite of the fact that it was in French, he enjoyed the film immensely. He loved the high concept of the three men and a baby, and he wanted it as Disney's next film. However, the rights became subject to a bidding war, but even though Eisner was usually fairly frugal, he persisted, believing that this concept was ripe to be, in his words, the next Stripes or the next Tootsie. Meanwhile, and we're all leading to the long road to Who Framed Roger Rabbit here, but bear with me. Meanwhile, the animation division at Disney was in something of a rut. It was in the doldrums. Their last proper flagship feature of the previous year, The Black Cauldron, had been thoroughly stomped by the Care Bears movie, believe it or not, which was a dark moment in the animation studio's history. I suppose I'm partially responsible for, in a way, because I remember watching the Care Bears movie at the cinema. So in some small, infinitesimal way, that's on me. But anyways, the Disney Animation Studios' 1986 release that year was Basil the Great Mouse Detective, which was interesting because since Eisner had come in, and Katzenberg especially, they'd stripped back a lot of those kind of hallowed artistic traditions of the Disney Animation division to make a cheaper final product, and it looked cheaper than Disney's previous animation films. Put simply, it didn't look great for the Mouse House's animators as a division. It seemed that it would be a slow decline. But Basil did make money. He made $38 million back from a $14 million budget, but it wasn't overly beloved, especially, least of all at Disney. An interesting side story, actually, the cheaper style of animation used to create Basil the Great Mouse Detective prompted a Disney executive named Stan Kinsey, who'd been working with a company named Pixar, to sense that maybe this was the time to make a play for Pixar. This was around the time that George Lucas was going through an expansive program, something Simon talked about very recently on one of his podcasts, and also by many accounts he was going through an equally expensive divorce and he was looking to sell Pixar. Kinsey got Disney at the head of the queue, but it was Katzenberg actually that overruled it, and instead the company Pixar went into the hands of Steve Jobs, and the rest I'm sure you know. Roy Disney though refused. He was the head of animation and of course related to Walt Disney himself, and the nephew, I believe, refused to let the deal completely die, and he did set up a partnership between Disney and Pixar, which eventually, 10 years later, would yield the first Toy Story. But I digress. Despite vetoing that Pixar deal, though, Katzenberg was the one that eventually got Spielberg into the room with Disney for the Roger Rabbit project. He wanted the prestige of Spielberg's name. And he also believed that, and this is where the kind of follow-on comes from the black culture, that a hybridized style of animation and live action would revitalize what the animation division, which at this point had become quite beleaguered. So Eisner went along with it, even though the budget was high. I mean, the Katzenberg hacked into it, and they brought it down to a more palatable $30 million. It was still high for Eisner, but he went along with it mainly because of his confidence in Spielberg. And of course, it was a high concept. It was the most high concept of films, which Eisner always had an affinity for. It was a strange deal, though. Spielberg would produce, Robert Zemeckis would direct Fresh from Back to the Future and Romancing the Stone, but the two creators would get full creative control, and Disney in turn would get to keep all of the merchandising rights. This was important. It was an important part of the deal because, as you're probably aware with Who Framed Roger Rabbit, it went well over budget. But because Zemeckis and Spielberg had creative control, I mean, it was already, I think, at the 30 million mark, the original mark, it was already the most expensive animation project of all time, and it's eventually spun well over budget. But Disney couldn't do a lot about it because they granted Spielberg and Zemeckis effectively the keys to the vault with a creative control deal. Interestingly, Disney had actually offered Zemeckis the film before in 1981, straight after he'd made the really rather fun Used Cars with Kurt Russell. But Disney didn't really at the time have the juice to get it made, and Zemeckis went elsewhere, and the project fell by the wayside. But fast forward to 86, and here it is, Zemeckis is on board, and he did make some concessions to cost. Spielberg's first choice, for instance, for the lead, for the character of Eddie Valentine, was Harrison Ford. But to save cost, and because Zemeckis is very fond of the way that Hoskins could use eyeline effectively, which is really important in a project where he'd be mainly conversing, interacting with animated characters, they brought in the great Bob Hoskins. Partly to save it for you, Bob, but also for the reasons just mentioned. Zemeckis also hired an artist named Richard Williams, who was the creator of the Pink Panther cartoons, as the animator. But he himself was quite an artiste with an E on the end, and brought some sensibilities to the project, which really kind of raised the costs reportedly. He refused in some ways to kind of work with Disney animators. Offended at the fact that they had to simply log in the morning. Time cards offended him, apparently. So anyway, at first he refused to take the job until he saw kind of ILM, who were part of the project as well. ILM had this cutting-edge technological advancement of printing animation onto film. When they showed him that they wanted the animated characters to interact with their background, so when Roger Rabbit sits down, dust comes up from the seat. At that point, he became quite excited, and he signed up. Also added into the spiralling budget was Zemeckis' approach to animation techniques. As the legend goes, the Disney animation team gave him a list of 8 things that he definitely couldn't do, including move the camera, which is a big no-no in animation, because of the huge amount of extra work it entails when the camera moves. The characters have to be resized. Naturally, Zemeckis then decided if he was going to make a film that broke boundaries, then he'd have to break those rules, and he summarily did, which of course, the budget to spiral. The budget ballooned. Eisner found out about this. He was supposedly furious. A meeting was called. The role of Williams, the enfant terrible, look at that, I have developed a taste for French now, the head animator, his role was reduced to just drawing the characters. In an effort to stave off bad press, Kim Masters, a film journalist of Premiere magazine, she was invited onto set onto the set to try and release a piece which would stave off these negative rumours that were circulating around the industry about the film's fate. If I can find an online transcript of that, I'll include it in the link below. It should be quite interesting for you to look at. It's worth a read. I'm also pulling a lot of info from James B. Stewart's really comprehensive book, The Disney War, which is also really well worth a read. But as far as rights go, that part actually, considering there's so many Warner Brothers characters sharing the screen with the Disney characters, that part was actually surprisingly amicable, considering that there was that kind of rights battle happening right up on screen. But it wasn't so much of a battle. Warners were actually really interested and excited by the project. They wanted to buy into it, but Disney rebuffed that offer and instead just paid them for the use of their characters, although, as I'm sure you can imagine, every interaction on screen was subject to serious approval meetings between the two companies to make sure that the two competing companies' characters didn't get the upper hand over one another and shared the exact same amount of screen time. When it came to the marketing phase, a few more concessions were made. The film lost its Disney label and became part of the Touchstone stable, something Eisner was actually really happy to do in the end, in the hope that the adult-orientated brand might bring in an older audience alongside the younger audience. And it worked. The film was a critical and commercial success. It earned $156 million off the back of what was ultimately a $50 million budget, funnily enough, the same budget that it started out with before Katzenberg cut the costs. But yeah, off a $50 million budget, it made $156 million and ended up as the second highest grossing film of 1988 after Rain Man. And Disney also did all right off all that merchandising money too. Even Warner's would see some cash out of the concept, as a few years later they would use the same live action crossed with animation approach to make Space Jam in 1996, which made a ton of money for them. The film, the basketball film featuring Bugs Bunny and Michael Jordan, to mention just a couple of the stars. So, all's well that ends well with Who Framed Roger Rabbit. We got a classic. Disney made profit. And really helped to move the field of animation along. And that really concludes another film story. You can, of course, get more film stories from Simon, our Orange Weekly podcast. You can follow us on Twitter at Film Stories Pod. You can get us on Facebook at Film Stories Online. Or you can just go and enjoy our lovely website at filmstories.co.uk. It would, of course, be completely rude of me to leave you without mentioning the brand new Film Stories magazine, which is currently being printed, issue 1 of which is now gone to print. You can subscribe to that by heading to the website and following the links. Please do subscribe and comment, retweet, share the love, bake us a cake. It all helps. We love you and we really appreciate it. We'll see you soon for another film story. This is Dan Cooper. Bye-bye.